Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to recognise this very important anniversary. 10 years ago, 10 years since the national apology for forced adoptions. I was not yet elected on the day in 2013 when Prime Minister Julia Gillard apologised on behalf of the Australian Government to people affected by forced adoptions and removal policies. I am humbled to stand here in the Australian Parliament 10 years on, to remember those impacted, those who are still grieving, those who have faced a lifetime of uncertainty, of loss, trauma and struggle, and those who are sadly no longer with us. From the 1940s, tens of thousands of babies were taken from their mothers by immoral and indeed often illegal acts. The national apology acknowledged the lifelong pain and suffering associated with forced adoption practices. Mothers were betrayed by a system that gave them no choice and subjected them to manipulation, mistreatment and malpractice, which left them dealing with that trauma, shame and grief and missing out on loving and caring for their babies. Some remain lost to another forever. Others struggled to reconnect and form relationships, all continued to feel the impacts throughout their lives. 10 years ago, Newcastle resident Therese Pearson was one of those mothers who travelled to Canberra to attend the apology by the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard. Therese was 19 when her baby boy was taken from her at a Catholic home for unmarried mothers. That was 1964. 60 years on, she still struggles with that pain. She says, "They ruined my life." That's what she says of the Catholic Church today. Therese gave one of more than 400 submissions. She was one of more than 400 submissions to the Senate inquiry into the Commonwealth contribution to former forced adoption policies and practices, and also gave evidence at a public hearing on the 29th of April 2011. Therese told the inquiry, "I did not want to adopt my baby out. I wanted to keep him." Therese said she was given drugs and forced to sign adoption papers. Her cousin was a nurse at the hospital and was in the labour ward when Therese gave birth. When Therese asked what sex her baby was, her cousin said she was not supposed to tell her, but that she had had a boy. After her son was born, Therese had returned to the home for unwed mothers, where she mopped floors and cleaned up after the nuns. She told the inquiry, Watara being a home for adopted and fostered babies, that she had to feed, dress, change and bathe other babies, which was heart-wrenching since her own baby had been taken from her. I stand here in recognition of Therese, her son, to all those mothers and children, to all those Newcastle families whose lives have been torn apart by forced adoptions. Therese is involved in a support network, Origins, which was founded back in 1995 by a group of mothers who lost children to those past adoption practices. She was very pleased, Therese, to know that the 10-year anniversary was being marked in the Federal Parliament today. Something that she had called my office about many, many weeks ago. This was playing on her mind, as it does every year, and she wanted to know what was the Australian Parliament preparing to do to mark this 10th anniversary. I know she will be pleased to receive a copy of the Minister's speech from this morning's ministerial statements to mark this day. Nothing can bring back those lost years between a mother and child. Nothing can prepare the damage to fathers who also were profoundly impacted by these policies and practices. Nothing can assist those siblings, grandparents, partners, and other family members who shared in that pain, that suffering, and that unimaginable grief. But the Labor government will keep striving to help heal some of those wounds that families still carry. The Albanese Labor government has today announced that $700,000 will be provided to assist to deliver trauma-informed support services. We know just how critical trauma-informed practices are, and if ever we are to try and deal with what is now intergenerational trauma for many of these families, having properly trained people working in accessible and affordable support services is critical. This funding will provide, as I said, training for aged care, allied health and forced adoption support service providers to ensure that they can deliver that targeted trauma-informed care. It will mean people affected by forced adoption can access appropriate care, care that is tailored to their specific needs, whatever stage of life and grief they're in. The government continues to provide $1.8 million annually for the forced adoption support services, which offers the national support from the National Helpline, casework and support and search services, as well as access to counselling for people across Australia. These are all important services, and this government will absolutely honour our commitment to ensure that those services are available, are accessible, and have no fear for their funding going forward. But as Julia Gillard said in this place back on the 21st of March 2013, when she said, "We resolve as a nation to do all in our power to make sure these practices are never repeated." That's what each and every one of us needs to commit to. In my community of Newcastle, there are sadly too many families that are impacted by these forced adoption and practices. Too much sadness, too much grief. And whilst we will do everything we can to support people today, we, on this side of the House, and I expect across the Parliament as a whole, really recommit ourselves on this 10th anniversary to ensuring that those despicable practices and policies are never allowed to see the light of day again in this nation. Yeah. But of course, it's only by facing squarely the truth of that past that we get to move forward and ensure that it's not repeated. And that is why the apology was so important. It's why those inquiries beforehand were so important, as confronting as they are, as uncomfortable as it might make people feel from time to time. Because of many of the institutions, like Therese, that she turned to for some support at a time in her life when she was overwhelmed by being an unwedded, pregnant girl at the age of 19, young woman. They were the very institutions she should have been able to trust. But that trust was utterly betrayed. And it is, as I said, only by facing up to that. The Catholic Church has an enormous role, as do all other institutions involved in the forced removal and adoptions of babies, have a lot to answer for, a lot of atonement to make. And to the credit of some, that is indeed happening. but it is it's a mission that they need to recommit themselves to each and every day. As the former Prime Minister Julia Gillard said those 10 years ago now, it is with profound sadness and remorse that we offer those mothers, those babies, those families our unreserved apology. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.